Neil, we had an event on the 4th of July developing brilliant human beings through sport. What were you trying to achieve on that day?
Well, I think there were a number of key areas which I wanted to explore. And I think the first one was to look at the return on investment that sport was getting from the many programs that it runs. And one of the factors that has concerned me is that so many people who have gone into top sport, when it ends, whether it be prematurely through injury or someone making a decision that you're not fulfilling your potential, so it ends at quite a young age, or even if you go the full journey and are very successful and have a career to 35, 40, that people leave sport feeling quite either frustrated or in some cases disillusioned, and in some cases bitter and resentful about their sporting experience. So that was a concern I had, that the impact on people's attitude to sport is not necessarily a healthy one. So I really wanted to explore what more could be done to help people with their thinking, not just to improve performance, but to enhance well-being throughout the sporting journey. And ultimately to create a situation where a life through sport created a lift-off for the second half of people's working lives, as opposed to being a sort of an edge of cliff experience where people are scrambling to get up and then clinging on, and then slowly sort of feeling the fingernails scraping as they're on the way down from sport. So that was one of the main areas which I wanted to explore. But I also wanted to bring together people from diverse backgrounds and leaders from across many different sectors, just to share ideas, also to really understand what's happening that's really healthy in other organisations and in other worlds, as well as coming at it from a problem-centric perspective where we're looking at what the difficulties are and looking at what more could be done.
And do you think you were successful?
I think so. One never knows when you're running a learning event the effect on people's thinking after they've left the room, the following week, the following month, and as the sort of months go by. It's now nearly 6 months, and I think the feedback that we've had was wonderful in that people really enjoyed connecting with some high-level achievers across different parts of society.
Are there any particular things you remember, things that people said, or the way they were said, or the way a table worked, that led you, that really stands out? Think, oh yeah, that's the kind of observation, or reflection, or conversation we need that's going to enable people to get this message?
I think there's two that really stand out strongly from my perspective. Was one, the quality of listening that there was in the room around the tables, and the other one was the power of not just the rich stories shared by some of the high-level sporting achievers who very generously contributed to the learning event, but particularly the conversation that Dr. Ken Jennings and John Inverarity had around not just the challenges of performing in elite sport, but also how people manage themselves, and the importance of paying greater attention to what's happening to people on the inner, because the rest of the world is judging sports people based on what they see on the outer, the body, the skill, the level of performance, the recognition of someone's face or name or voice, but just ensuring that the individuals themselves really understand what makes them tick, and helping them to understand more about how they can take better care of themselves,
Sure.
so that they can ride the variety of ups and downs that a life in sport has, but also that it provides people with a foundation to lead a really good life beyond sport. And I think it was in that conversation where John Inverarity spoke very eloquently about the need to have a healthy hinterland. And that really struck a chord with me.
Someone who'd been a teacher and developed a whole other side to his professional life.
Yeah, I mean, John has been an exceptional leader across education and sport. But I think he's understanding that the way sport is moving, it's increasingly becoming more prescriptive in terms of what people need to do and when they need to do it. So people are losing their sense of self along the way if they're not careful. And his comment that an all-round education is absolutely critical, not in case you don't make the grade, but in case you do. And I also feel that the importance of having people like Dr. Ken Jennings and David Priestley as psychologists who work in a way where they support the development of the person and not just the performer actually pays a dividend in terms of performance. But getting sporting institutions to actually understand that, as opposed to just hiring more and more people to add more intensity around the need to perform. I think that there are some really good examples in sport today, Saracens Rugby being one, Anderlecht Football Club being another, where there is a recognition of the whole person. And it's not just in order to get a better performance out of them. There is a true commitment to creating shared experiences, which is going to bind those people together whilst they're at the club, but also help them to remember their sporting careers in a way which is beyond just the results or what they earned.
And I think what struck me most about the conversation was the readiness and preparedness of people around the tables to talk about themselves and their excitement and joys about life, but also their challenges. And for me, there were two real contributions to that helped us. One was the power, as you've been saying, Neil, of the stories we heard from our sportsmen and sportswomen there, which chimed with the lives that we have in other parts of our working lives. So, for instance, to hear Shemi talk about moving from 85 to 100%, or Billy talking about his challenges of being out of form, or Richard Hill talking about being told that he was never going to be an international rugby player. Those things, I think, stoked us up, because we know in our wider work outside sport that people are wrestling with issues of confidence, resilience, keeping going in really tough circumstances. So I think it really struck a chord for people to hear. So there's real lessons for me from these young sportsmen and women, and even Richard's quite young still, really help us in our wider.
They certainly gave people permission, didn't they,
Yes.
to open up,
Yes.
modelling it.
Yeah.
I think the one probably that struck me most was Katie Sexton, hitting at such a young age, as swimmers often do in that particular sport, great success, and describing herself at age 30, just 30, having to rebuild a new life and really starting from the bottom again. So that as that did provoke really rich conversation and people themselves opening up, was there anything that you particularly heard from the tables, or perhaps the general tone of the comments that people fed back at the end of those conversations, which leads you to conclude that they'd really kind of the heart of the message?
Yes, I think it was a lot about what people were saying about their lives.
Yeah.
But also in terms of my learning about inner resources and inner fitness, there were so many things. I want to pick out two things in particular. One was the notion of we as human beings have a default response, which we turn to, particularly under stress. And John M. Verrera brought that beautifully when he said when we're faced with pressure, what we often feel, we have to work harder. You can see him doing, we have to work harder, work harder, work harder. And yet we know that's not, and he was saying that's not the answer. We have to do other things, pause, find something else to do, think about other resources. But that default response of going to work harder, work harder. And the other thing for me was so strong that this, which I think came up around the room, was this sense that as we think about the development of young people in sport, if we want them to be resilient at the crease or in the scrum or at the top of the ski run, we really do need to make sure that their development, the academies, encourage that. And I think we came away with a sense from the whole room that too much is prescribed for these young people. Day to day, over-scheduled lives, over-structured, where there's very little choice or space to really think for themselves because everything's spoon-fed, because we're on a track to become a brilliant performer. And yet that's not encouraging the end result that we want, which is resilience.
And they start those habits very young, don't they? Perhaps just to finish, that's lovely comments from Julie. What's your final comment about the what next? Where does that lead you to where we take this idea for next?
Well, I think my overriding feeling was just one of real joy that people wanted to commit to helping young people to develop in a different and better way over time. And that this genuine commitment to developing the inner fitness, the inner leadership skills, isn't just to get a better performer. People have actually seen the bigger picture. And I think as a consequence of doing that, the more this movement grows, then over time, people will recognise it's the way to go. It's a healthier model to follow. Because for me, there's just too much sort of wastage in sport. People who have had potential, gone in there, and have not quite delivered against that predicted potential. And there's also examples of people who have delivered against their sporting potential, but as a consequence, them as a human being haven't expanded in the way that they were possibly capable of. So I think that the fact that there's a real commitment to doing this was very significant to me.
That's very exciting, isn't it?